The near future. A world where agriculture no longer smells of soil, where no farmer's hands are stained with earth, and where the gentle hum of bees has disappeared. Everything now is programmed. Every seed is sown by the steel arms of unmanned drones. Every drop of water is measured precisely by moisture sensors. Every act of pollination is performed by millions of synthetic bee robots, following calculated algorithms. Humanity proudly calls it Agriculture 5.0, a world without error, without delay, without the need to wait for seasons or watch the sky to guess the rain. Data is the new deity. AI is the farmer of the digital age. Massive food supply chains operate like Swiss watches, precise, efficient, and emotionless. Nature has been optimized. No more weeds aren't profitable. No more bugs cause losses. And real bees, those once considered the sole keepers of harvests, have been removed from the ecosystem altogether. People say, robot bees are more efficient. They don't sleep, don't die, and don't need wildflowers to survive. The once green fields are now flat concrete expanses filled with massive hydroponic farms. Forests have been replaced with biofactories. Where there were once bird song and breezes, now there's only the rhythmic hum of engines and air purifiers. Farmers are no longer needed. Bees are no longer needed. Spring is no longer needed, for any season can now be manufactured using artificial light and climate control. Everything is controlled by data, and humanity, though still alive, seems to drift further from the roots of life itself. In that world, few remember the scent of a real flower, the sound of bees gliding through a meadow, or the feeling of fingertips sinking into sun-warmed soil. They only remember yield, speed, and the precision of a system that no longer has a heart. While the rest of the world chased after Agriculture 5.0 in a forgotten little valley on the edge of the technological metropolis, one traditional garden still survived. No machines, no programmed pipelines, no artificial lighting. That patch of land belonged to old Bao, a farmer in his 70s, skin weathered by the sun, hands calloused, and eyes as gentle as a late afternoon sky. People once called him outdated, stubborn, even a roadblock to progress. When the entire village was cleared to build an automated agricultural coordination center, he was the only one who refused to leave. "I cannot live," he said, "if I don't get to hear the earth crack open after a good rain." His garden was small, surrounded by bamboo groves, filled with seasonal vegetables, a patch of wet rice field, and fruit trees bearing all year round. But what made it truly special was something no one else had seen in years: real bees. They still came here, day after day, gathering around the lavender, pumpkin blossoms, mustard flowers. No one could explain why. But old Bao knew. Because he never used chemicals. Because he planted wildflowers around his fields. Because he left the weeds at the walls and kept hollow tree branches for bees to hibernate. Because he respected nature, not controlled it. Each morning, Bao would sit with his hot cup of tea, listening to the bees buzzing what he called the music of life. He didn't need moisture sensors. A handful of soil told him exactly how much water the garden needed. He had no plant growth monitor. One look at the leaves, and he knew what they lacked or had too much of. The seasons passed, and his little garden kept blooming and fruiting without a single robot. His former neighbors now lived in high-rise apartments in the city, eating synthetic vegetables, drinking powdered milk, forgetting he even existed. But Bao didn't mind. He believed one truth: humanity could invent everything except the heart of nature. And then came a brutal winter. The global bee robot system crashed, paralyzed by an AI virus. Pollination ceased. Tech farms failed. Crops stopped bearing fruit. The food supply chain spiraled into chaos. Yet in that moment of collapse, Old Bao's little garden still bloomed, still buzzed with bees. And that's when people remembered the old farmer, the man who had walked against the tide of progress, yet carried with him the living memory of a world where nature and humankind were still friends. That spring, something no one ever thought would happen, happened. The global AI agricultural system suffered a catastrophic failure. A faulty line of code from a routine update triggered a massive malfunction in millions of robotic bees. They began to fly erratically, crashing into greenhouses, stinging at random, and then falling from the sky like rain. Artificial pollination, the pride of technological agriculture, failed spectacularly. In less than 3 weeks, all the so-called smart fields fell into silence. Flowers failed to bear fruit. Plants produced no seeds. Melons, tomatoes, peppers withered, shriveled, and died. Supermarket chains, once boasting AI-certified organic shelves, complete with scannable QR codes, stood empty. Urban populations panicked. For the first time in years, they realized, without bees, there is no food. Machines don't know how to love flowers. Code cannot comprehend the rhythm of nature. And in that world, the very humans who once boasted about having replaced nature now stood helpless, confused, and starving in the haunting silence of fields without bees. Emergency meetings were held. Top scientists scrambled to fix the system. But every solution came too late. While servers analyzed the error, real food was vanishing by the hour, by the minute. Amid the crisis, news outlets began whispering about a mysterious man, an old farmer on the outskirts of the city, where fruits were still ripening, flowers still blooming, and bees still flying. At first, it was just a rumor. Then, it became national news. The first group of reporters arrived at Mr. Bao's garden, armed with drones, biosensors, and skepticism. But what they saw left them speechless. A small, vibrant patch of land. Wildflowers dancing in the breeze. Lush red tomatoes glistening in the sun. And real bees, dozens, then hundreds, buzzing from blossom to blossom, working diligently as if no technological revolution had ever taken place. One reporter asked him, "What's your secret?" Mr. Bao simply smiled, scratched the back of his neck, and replied gently, "There's no secret. I just never forgot nature." That sentence went viral almost instantly. And for the first time in years, people stopped asking questions about innovation and started asking about love for the soil, for the flowers, for the bees, and for the very life we once believed we could control. Since the day news of Mr. Bao's garden spread, people from all corners began journeying to that forgotten countryside. Not for tourism, not out of fleeting curiosity, but out of a deep longing to reclaim something they had unknowingly lost: the true rhythm of life. At first, it was just a handful of old farmers, the ones once pushed off their land by machines. They came, stood silently before the vibrant garden of Mr. Bao, listened to the gentle hum of bees, and breathed in the scent of wild grass mingled with basil and mint blossoms. Then they wept. No one had expected to miss so dearly. The sound of earth cracking underfoot, the trickle of flowing water, or the chirp of warblers in the trees. Mr. Bao, still in his old brown shirt, his hands caked with soil, quietly showed each visitor how to raise a plant from a real seed. How to plant flowers not for their beauty, but because bees need them. How to place a small dish of water in the shade where a bee might rest mid-flight. "No rush," he would say. "Nature doesn't like haste." And indeed, in that garden, everything moved to its own rhythm, slow but steady. Since his youth, Mr. Bao had refused every offer to bring modern technology into his land. They called him outdated, nostalgic, but he just smiled. To him, the beehive in the attic, the wild daisies along the fence, and the sound of wind rustling through banana leaves were proof that he had never truly lost anything at all. Each morning, Mr. Bao rose before sunrise and walked barefoot through the garden. He spoke to the trees, placed his hand on the base of each vegetable stalk, and bowed gently to the bees as they began a new day. It was a ritual he had learned from his father, who once told him, "If you want the bees to stay, let your heart fly with them." By noon, Mr. Bao would share the first harvest of honey with those who came to learn. No one paid a cent, but everyone left with something far more precious: peace. One took home seeds, another fertile soil, another simply a renewed belief that to live simply, to live together, was never obsolete. And then the miracle began to spread. Gardens sprang up across the village, not identical, not synchronized, but each had one thing in common: no hum of machinery, only the song of bees. And whenever someone asked, "How do we begin?" the answer was always the same: find the wings again. Wings of the bee, of nature, and of the hearts that had once been shut away by the illusions of technology. Since the day the first people came to Mr. Bao's garden, the atmosphere here gradually began to shift. At first, it was just a few families who quietly arrived, asking for a corner of land to grow vegetables. Then came groups of young people worn out by the soulless days of living in metallic cities, who began to seek their way back. Mr. Bao's once quiet garden was now filled with new sounds: the chatter of voices, the rhythmic strikes of hoes on soil, the soft rustling of leaves brushing against one another in the breeze. But above all, there was the steady hum, resonating like a soundtrack to resurrection. It was the sound of real wings. Mr. Bao still kept his old habits, waking at dawn, strolling through the garden, leaning close to each hive just to listen. He didn't need measuring devices, no data charts. Only the sound of the bees, the color of the petals, and the softness of the soil were enough to tell him how the season would unfold. At first, the young people were lost. They couldn't tell the difference between a worker bee and a queen. They didn't know when to sow flowers to welcome the bees for pollination. They were used to phone apps that calculated the precise amount of water for each plant. Now, they were learning to read sunlight, to feel soil moisture with their bare hands. One day, a young woman asked Mr. Bao, "How do we bring the bees back to us, sir?" He didn't answer immediately. He simply pointed toward a cluster of pale lavender, where a single bee was gently collecting nectar. "To bring the bees back," he said slowly, "you don't need tools. You need patience. And you need to create a place where they feel welcome." And so, from the cracked dirt paths, flowers slowly began to bloom again. Every small patch of land tended with Lavino pesticides, no chemicals, became an invitation for the bees to return. People began to see the difference more clearly. In gardens with real bees, flowers bore fruit and plants thrived. In those using robotic bee sieve, they still functioned. The fruits came out misshapen, lifeless. Because real bees don't just work, they connect life. They carry pollen, yes, but they also bring back the miracle of ecological balance. At night, under the gourd vines stretching over the porch, everyone gathered for dinner, sharing stories about their old lives, about the world of metal, of pollinating robots, and of plants without seeds. Then they'd look around the garden, at the bees dancing beneath the sunset, and whisper to themselves, "Perhaps we were wrong to believe we could replace nature. But thank goodness, someone still kept the wings." And in that little garden, a new generation was rising. Not through apps, but with hands, hearts, and a belief that nature doesn't need machines to run. It only needs humans who are humble enough to listen. Mo. When the third consecutive harvest failed on a massive scale, when algorithm-run fields turned yellow and wilted, when machines froze from satellite connection losses, and robotic bees flew in circles with no real flowers left to land on, humankind finally began to feel the weight of something deeply important that had been lost. Electronic billboards outside supermarkets flashed, "Out of stock, no supply available." Food printers ground to a halt. Cities, once programmed down to the timing of each traffic light, now stood frozen in confusion and hunger. And amid that crisis, one name began to echo like a curious tale: Mr. Bao. They said that in an old valley where network signals couldn't reach and drones dared not fly, there existed a small garden still blooming with flowers and bearing fruit. And bees, real bees, still came home to it. At first, it was only a handful of curious visitors. They arrived in expensive shoes, carrying cameras and biomonitors. But the moment they stepped into Mr. Bao's garden, where wildflowers bloomed along a weathered wooden fence and bees hummed softly around rosemary bushes, they fell silent. There were no spreadsheets, no operating systems. Yet here, the plants still grew. The flowers still blossomed. The bees still lived. And people found themselves being taught again how to sit on the ground, feel the scent of damp grass, and listen to the hum of wings instead of the hum of artificial intelligence. Mr. Bao didn't speak like a professor. He simply worked slowly, carefully, just as he had done all his life. He taught them how to sprout seeds without machines, how to read the weather through clouds and wind, and most importantly, how to invite the bees back, not through technology, but through kindness. Beneath the canopy of trees, a new generation was quietly being reborn, not through lines of code, but through memory and faith. That spring came late, but when it arrived, it felt as though people had never truly experienced a real spring until then. Mr. Bao's small garden, once dismissed as outdated, suddenly became the center of a quiet but powerful awakening. Those who had left in search of solutions through technology began to return, not with devices, but with bare hands and humble questions. How do we bring real bees back? How do we keep the earth from cracking open? How can my child know the scent of flowers, the true taste of fruit? Mr. Bao didn't have immediate answers. He wasn't a professor, nor a researcher, but he took everyone out into the garden. He placed a seed in their hands and said, "Before you ask anything, try planting this." So they planted. Hands once only familiar with tapping keyboards now felt the unfamiliar texture of soil under their nails. They crouched beside vegetable beds, listening to bees buzz overhead, turning their heads to follow the sound as if it were an ancient melody from the earth itself. Mr. Bao taught them how to make beehives from reclaimed wood, how to lure bees with rows of white daisies, lavender, and rosemary planted in uninterrupted stripes. He taught them how to recognize the gratitude of the land when it's given back the most basic things: sunlight, rainwater, and a patient pair of hands. The elders learned to read the weather by the color of the sky, The children learned to tell the difference between the buzz of a worker bee and a queen. Women who once only cooked with packaged food learned to make rose syrup and mint honey infusions. The entire garden came alive not just in color, but in sound, scent, and the return of laughter long forgotten. No one here talked about assets or markets. They spoke of the smell of soil after a night's rain, of the first flower touched by a real bee, and of the first drop of honey falling into a wooden bowl like a drop of true gold, priceless and pure. As children chased bees between the trees, Mr. Bao sat quietly beneath the star apple tree, eyes gazing into the distance. He understood what he was preserving wasn't just bees, nor just a garden. It was a living memory, something simple that humanity had forgotten for far too long. Nature does not need to be controlled. It only needs to be loved again the right way. The first harvest day after many years passed like a miracle. Golden squash blossoms bloomed along trellises, cucumbers curled gently around bamboo poles, corn ears swelled full, and tomatoes ripened into deep red under the sun. But what made people cry wasn't the sweetness of the fruit, it was the buzzing of bees over every garden bed, every flower. A sound once thought erased from memory now returned like a long-lost song. People began calling Mr. Bao's garden by a new name, the Living Wing Haven, a place where every wing beat was a new breath for the earth, where nature was no longer something to be extracted, but a trusted companion. Each morning, the whole village gathered at a long wooden table in the center of the garden, sharing breakfast with honey-slathered bread, herbal tea, and fruits picked fresh from the trees. No Wi-Fi, no screens, just eyes meeting eyes, and the gift of true presence. Mr. Bao, now nearly all silver-haired, still rose with the dawn like always. He made his morning rounds through the garden, whispering something to the bees. "Thank you for not leaving us," he would say. And as if in reply, the bees would circle around his head in slow, reverent loops, a quiet dance of gratitude. At the first harvest festival of each year, people came from near and far, carrying a story, a seed, or a promise. They didn't just honor Mr. Bao the wing keeper, they reminded themselves, if bees remain, life remains. If there are still those who protect the wings, the earth still has hope. Mr. Bao's story was never written in textbooks, nor aired on television, but it spread like a quiet seed planted in the hearts of those who realized you don't need super technology to save the world. You only need a small piece of earth, a pair of steady hands, and a heart that refuses to give up on nature. And so, children grew up alongside bees, learning to name every flower, to sit still and listen to the earth breathe, to understand that not everything must be fast, optimized, or efficient. A melon that grows slowly, nurtured by sun, by rain, and by bees, is the most worth waiting for. When Mr. Bao passed away, no bronze statue was built in his honor. Instead, they planted a lavender bush where he used to sit, and placed a small wooden sign that read, "The wing keeper left behind no fortune, but a world that remembered how to live rightly." A final message: no bees, no farmers. No farmers, no food. But with one heart that dares to believe again, life will always find its way back. If the story of the wing keeper has touched your heart, please don't keep it to yourself. A like, share, and subscribe to our channel to help us spread even more stories filled with hope, love for nature, and deep gratitude for this earth we call home. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell, because each new video is a tiny seed planted to inspire something good in you, a kind thought, a gentle action, a renewed reason to care for the bees, for the trees, and for the human heart. And if you know someone who is quietly protecting life, a farmer, a gardener, or simply a soul who refuses to give up in this modern world? Send them this video as a heartfelt thank you. Because the world doesn't need more perfect technology. It needs more people brave enough to protect what is simple and true. Thank you for listening. May you be the next wing keeper. Sagan.